Why do you think we've come here today to talk about the importance of safe spaces for LGBTQ plus people because it's World Mental Health Day? Why do each of you think that safer spaces are important for LGBTQ plus people? And try to think as well in the context of this year's theme for World Mental Health Day as well, particularly in times of crisis, catastrophe, or emergency. So who would like to take the lid off that bottle?
I'll jump in. Okay, so I when I was thinking about this question, the thing that immediately came out to me was the kind of second half of that with the crisis, catastrophe, emergency aspect, which all seem like really like scary words when you first say them as well.
Hmm.
But I was going to link back to the kind of theme that I honestly think everybody already has described with this like hypervigilance that a lot of LGBTQ plus people have, and that like subconscious calculating of, is it safe to be myself here? Can I, often if you're out with like friends or your partner, like, can I hold their hand? Or a lot of these questions that I myself, maybe a couple of years ago, would have felt a bit safer generally, but now I feel like we're kind of regressing in a way. I think in the context of crisis, that's often multiplied. And we have this kind of state when disaster hits, whether that's a pandemic, political tension, or just like times of your own personal difficulties, where society kind of reverts and forgets the groups of people that maybe need the most support. And I think queer people quite often are kind of pushed into the margins of that. I think safer spaces in that context is more than just a friendly environment, and that safer spaces are quite literally a mental health life raft. And that's that space that you know that you can go and like recharge. And I felt that so many times in my own life where I quite recently became the chair of the Scottish Queer International Film Festival, which is always a mouthful to like say. And the first opening night last year that I went to, and we've got one coming up very, very soon. I just remember that, like, I'm sure it's an experience we've all had where you're like, leave feeling really excited and like you're like, oh, I'm going to do all these new projects and things. And I think in times of crisis, that's so important. And when you go to Pride or a protest or these kind of things, you get that kind of drive again. And that to me is another kind of form of safer space where you're fighting with the community that you're a part of. Yeah.
Thank you, Emma. Anybody else?
Okay. I don't know how to lower my hand. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so I think, I mean, Emma, I 100% agree with everything you've said, so it's like quite hard to follow on from that. But like from a personal anecdote, I remember when I was younger, at school, like I must have been 15, 16 years old, and I sought help for my own mental health. I had a counsellor who was lovely, but every time I brought up the fact that I was gay, that was avoided and it wasn't spoken about. So this place that I've sought out to try and feel safer, to try and work on myself in times of crisis, immediately didn't become safe anymore, because I couldn't talk about my life fully. And it's not that there was any remarks made against it, but it just wasn't acknowledged. And I think then following on, like with my research now, looking at LGBT mental health and domestic abuse, we see that people are so scared of being doubly victimized. So they've had a trouble in an interpersonal conflict, let's say, and then they're going to seek help, and then they're told, well, you're not allowed in here, or what are your pronouns, what does that even mean? And it's just that re-victimization which is going to stop people from seeking help further along the line as well. So it's more likely that we as queer people are going to get to the crisis point because we're just not going to seek the help in the first place. So I do think it is quite a structural issue. Is it a lack of training? Is it a lack of funding, a lack of awareness? All of the above. And is there other aspects? Absolutely. So I think how we can create those safer spaces for crisis is a big challenge. But conversations like this is absolutely like the starting point, because our voices are the most important at the moment to start making these safer spaces.
Yeah. I agree with that last point there in particular there, Riley. One of the conversations that I've had recently is that it's difficult to define what a safe space looks like for people because there's such a spectrum of what it is. And also as well, if you're particularly maybe if you're an organization and you're trying to create or talk about the safe spaces, unless you've got that lived experience or you're the person that's leading that particular safe space, there's a question mark in my head as to whether or not you should be talking about that being a safe space because it wasn't created for you. I can see Sam nodding his head there. Is there anything you wanted to add, Sam? Or are you just nodding?
No, I'm nodding in agreement. That's something that we really pride ourselves on at XY as well. Something I like to try and do with the university. University are far more like, we've really got to tiptoe around everything. Very hard. But what we're really grateful for is that we have the counselling resource for our young people as well. So we provide that counselling thing. So we have quite a lot of our young people that come to us who are in distress or in crisis state, and we have to mitigate ways of, avoiding harm or at least reducing that harm that they might want to do to themselves, or hopefully not others, but primarily themselves. And I think being able to have that resource available or having the funding there to provide that service, and it all comes back to money. Realistically, let's be fair, all of it is, and it's the same whether it's NHS mental health services, or we see the extensive waiting list with CAM services for young people, and whether they're questionable or otherwise, and certainly how the young people come out of those services, some often more damaged than when they were in, because they're not dealing with people with their lived experiences, or they're not seeing themselves reflected in the people that they're speaking to. And I think that, that even just a representative of their potential future, or another queer person to speak to, or just a role model that's had some, whether they've lived in the same town and had similar experiences, even within a local sense, is massive for their mental health, because at least then they can see that there is a future for them, there is something for them to work towards, and that little bit of hope, no matter how small that is often a driving force for them to carry on.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam. Dear Jack, anything you would add when we're looking at the importance of these safer spaces for LGBTQ plus people in terms of crisis, catastrophe, or emergency?
Oh, shall I go? Sorry.
Go on, Jack.
I was kind of thinking along the lines, again, I think building slightly on that community aspect of that connection as well. I think certainly when you look at historically things like Section 28, and sort of when you talk to people about the impact of that, it was that sort of not knowing anybody else or not knowing about themselves and feeling quite isolated. And, like you're the odd one out or the strange person, or that no one else is feeling that. And I think even on a very small scale, if you know actually one other person who has that experience, it can be really affirming and can really reduce a lot of the pressure and stress, or having that space where you can talk to somebody you can talk to somebody who understands. I know when we kind of look at like data from youth groups people on the charities I'm involved with, it's something that comes back constantly in the feedback is actually being able to talk to people who are like them is really important and really does have an impact on well-being. So I think that's something that I think is really important. It's about the connection and being able to have human contact with people who understand you. And I think that's really vital. And then I was just wondering a little bit about like the services, because I think in the last couple of years, I've only ever accessed LGBT specific services. And I'd never really thought about it, but I think I just did that instantly because I knew I wouldn't have those additional barriers. And kind of I'm starting to think, actually, I'd never really thought about actually if you went to a non-specific service, there probably would be barriers, and whether I'd find myself able to access the support in the same way. It's almost like I can't really articulate that because I haven't tried the non-safe space version really.
I think as well, something that you were saying there, I think, and forgive me if I've made an incorrect link there, Jamie, who's watching today as well, one of our current winners from the QSAs has mentioned around safe spaces not having to be physical. It could be a phone call, it could be an online space, just or even just a feeling between people as well. I think that's often really important. We'll come back to that because I want to give Dhiren an opportunity to address the question around the importance of spaces, but there's something there around connection and feeling that you've just said there, Jack, that Jamie said as well, that was going to be something that I was going to spring on you all. So I will put a pin in there and remind myself to come back. So Dhiren.
I think just listening to what Rylee was sharing earlier around the experience of having a non-queer counsellor or a therapist, I see that time and again in my therapy room. It doesn't need to be explicitly said, but it's just that understanding that we sit opposite each other and we know that there will be some shared kind of understanding and shared experiences. But I think also the part I wanted to bring to kind of to our attention is that as a marginalized group within our queerness, there are further marginalizations. There are people within that who then face kind of multiple layers of microaggression. And we will have people, for example, those that exist within a Finter group who may be further marginalized by those who still exist in the wider LGBTQIA umbrella. So I think what I was going to say is, in a crisis, when we have a safe space, even though we may have a queer space, we may still look to find very specialized services to make sure that those people are supported further. And in times like we have at the moment, where, you know, there are things going on out there in terms of legislation where particular segments of our society are being victimized, for want of a better word, and targeted, the sense of community, the sense of us bounding together and being supportive of each other and standing in solidarity, that's really, really important. And I would say, like, my last point is the fact that actually safer spaces aren't just a nice to have. I think they're literally life-saving. They are life-saving.